2024, British police were called to a property on Ashland Close in Bushey, Hertfordshire. Officers already knew it was going to be bad. However, none of them were ready to discover what was waiting for them behind closed doors. It was around the beginning of 2023 that Kyle and Louise traveled beyond their friendship and, fortunately, would begin a relationship. It appears that his tough exterior seemed to give way to softer moments, and Louise absolutely loved that side of him. But as the months passed by, his angry side came out, and she was exposed to his explosive behavior, and then his controlling tendencies too. He started asking Louise not to wear makeup or any revealing clothing, claiming that she was for his eyes only and no one else's. He would also hate it whenever she left the property. And by the way, this was despite not even living with her. Adding to this dangerous mix, Kyle became increasingly obsessed with online content that seemed to promote misogynistic beliefs. Friends of his noted that he frequently watched videos from online influencers who pushed extreme ideologies, and all of this content only seemed to deepen his anger and fuel his violent nature. So, once again, it's no wonder that after 18 months of being together, the relationship had ultimately become strained. Louise was deeply in love with Kyle. However, even she could see that he was not the man that she had hoped for him to be. But on June the 26th, 2024, she had finally found the strength to break things off with him. However, although it was a horrible time for the both of them, Louise desperately wanted to do this gently, carefully, and in a way that empowered Kyle. And so, in a text message, she said, "I am so sorry, Kyle. I don't know that, in the future, if we both do the work on ourselves, this could be something amazing. But I just feel right now I owe it to myself to take some space and walk away for my own sanity and health. Thank you for the incredible time we've had this year. I hope you know how much I love you and still will for a long time. I never want there to be anything nasty between us ever. Take care of yourself always, please." Believe it or not, but Kyle responded quite kindly, saying, "Thank you for the clarity, Louise, so we can both start our healing process. I love you so much and will do for a long time." However, that compassion, it wouldn't last for very long. Within hours, Kyle was barraging Louise with hundreds of messages, just desperately clinging on to any attention he could get from her. And it wasn't just that he couldn't accept the situation, but he was upset too. Kyle was furious, not only at Louise, but also her family and friends for trying to convince her to leave him. After finally breaking up, Kyle's world came crashing down. To add to his fury, he believed that, without Louise, he was nothing. And so, it is safe to say that he felt depressed, bitter, and was soaked in self-pity. His mind began to wander. He determined that if he couldn't have Louise, then no one could. He also determined that if he couldn't be with Louise, then he didn't want to live either. And so, Kyle came to a horrible conclusion. It was on June the 30th, 2024, that Kyle began his evil plans. He kicked off by researching potential ways to murder Louise. This included looking at weapons online and ways to restrain a victim. After finally deciding what he could tangibly buy online, he opted for a crossbow and bolts for £357, the equivalent of $461 US. He would also spend £89 on a high-level butchering knife from Amazon, the equivalent of $115 US. Now, if he was to carry out the attack, then this purchase alone would prove sustained contemplation. He would have to wait for all of this to be delivered, meaning this was no spur-of-the-moment crime of passion. On July the 6th, a surveillance camera in a local tool station recorded him purchasing a pack of rope. He seemed to think long and hard about whether he needed one large pack or two small ones instead. You should really think about what was going through his mind here. Like, will 2 sets of 20 meters of rope be enough to bind, trap, and then murder my ex? Or should I go for a roll of 50 instead? The following day, he purchased 2 tanks of fuel from a hardware store, both of which he would never use, and then in a third store, some duct tape, but just the one roll this time. By now, his crossbow and bolts had both been delivered to his property, and he had also ordered an air pistol just in case. In the days leading up to the murders, Kyle would write several letters to his family and to himself. In one letter, he wrote, "Please don't think of me as throwing my life away. I have lived, and I am grateful for everything and everyone who has been a part of it. I know you will have so many questions and will wish you could have done something to prevent this. However, none of you have failed. In another letter, which was addressed to himself, he said, "To myself, I am so sorry I didn't give myself a chance to move on past this to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I know you want to find peace and it's a battle in your head right now. What's different this time? I don't want to live my life without her. Nothing I can think of can make me happy. This is my decision to just be at peace." At 1:37 p.m, Kyle first parked his car away from the Hunt family home in an effort to carefully check whether Louise's father was in or out. As we know, he had already researched John's work schedule in advance, ensuring that he would not be home to intervene. After receiving confirmation that John was actually out of the property, Kyle then left the area, returning later with a bag of Louise's clothes and a thank you card which was addressed to both her parents. A calculated move to deceive Carol with his actual intention. He approached the family's doorstep, and then, moments later, Carol opened the door to greet him. Now, although she was initially surprised to see Kyle, both the bag and the card made it look like that he was there to reconcile. And so, with his warm gesture and friendly conversation, she kindly let him inside, unaware of the danger standing right before her. The very moment that Kyle stepped through the doorway, his demeanor changed and he snapped in an instant, stabbing Carol multiple times until he was certain that she was dead. After murdering Carol in cold blood, he left the home to retrieve his crossbow. During this time, Louise was busy working in the garden, utterly unaware of what had just happened inside her own family home. She had no idea that her mother was now dead, or that her ex-boyfriend was inside, waiting for her. When she did eventually enter the house, Kyle ambushed her immediately. Louise was restrained with duct tape, her wrists and ankles were bound, and her mouth was gagged to prevent her from calling for help. Over the next grueling 2.5 hours, he assaulted her in the most awful of ways. And just as her sister was about to enter the property, he then struck her with a bolt from his crossbow. Hannah was in a hurry when she arrived, and she entered the home as if it were any typical evening, walking in and expecting to see her mother or her sister preparing dinner. And sadly, she would only realize that things were different when it was all too late. When she realized that Kyle was in the property, she was able to send one abrupt text message to her boyfriend, saying, "Call the police, Leggy, immediately, to mine, now. Kyle here. Police, now, he's tying us up." But sadly, before she had any chance to escape, he turned the crossbow on her and shot her with a single bolt to the chest. With surveillance footage, we can tell that Kyle left the property at 6:55 p.m, only 2 minutes after murdering Hannah. The neighbor's camera captured him leaving with his crossbow concealed under a white cloth as he casually walked towards his car before then driving away. However, once the police found this surveillance footage and the rest of the Hunt family were able to confirm that Kyle was likely a suspect, he seemed to simply vanish off the face of the earth. The initial search for Kyle began 14 miles east of Bushy, where 10 armed police officers with riot shields descended on his family home in Enfield at 8 a.m. the following morning. While invading the property, detectives found letters which were addressed not only to himself but his family members too. Of course, this all but confirming their suspicions that he had murdered not 1 but 3 innocent women. And so, with that said, Kyle was now officially a wanted, armed and dangerous man. Later that same afternoon, the authorities received an anonymous phone call from someone saying that they believed that Kyle might be hiding in a cemetery in the hilly fields area of Enfield, which was only a little over 100 meters away from his family's home. Probably not the smartest of ideas, because anyone in the area would surely be able to recognize him. But it seems that Kyle had chosen this area for one good reason, and that's because he was not prepared to walk away alive. Once again, police officers swarmed the area and surrounded the cemetery, preparing for what could possibly be Kyle's final showdown. But before anybody could reach him, he would unfortunately take control of the situation, saying that it would not go the way he planned. After reloading the crossbow, he then turned it around, aimed it at his chest, and then pulled the trigger, hoping it would end his life. However, Kyle seriously fucked up, because despite really injuring himself, he would ultimately survive. except now he was permanently disabled. The next 2.5 months would be brutal for Kyle, where he underwent extensive surgery and recovery multiple times, while also being under guarded watch 24/7. In fact, he set a new record here by receiving the longest daily demand on policing in the force's recent history. Doctors analyzing his case would realize that the bolt had unfortunately pierced his spinal cord, not only leaving him paralyzed from the waist down, but also meaning that it is unlikely that he will ever walk again. In addition to this, he seemed to also seriously injure his voice, meaning that he can't speak for long or very loudly. On September the 16th, which was 70 days after the brutal attacks, he was finally fit enough to attend an interview where he would finally go on to say that he was sorry and even comment that his behavior was atrocious. Kyle pleaded guilty to the murders of Carol, Louise, and Hannah. However, despite all of the overwhelming evidence available, he would deny sexually assaulting Louise, which meant that the rest of her family would have to sit through days of distressing evidence while in court. During his trial, the jury listened to his arrogance and aggression, his refusal to let her go, the extensive planning and research into murdering Louise, his deceptive tactics on Carol, his barbaric behavior between the murders, and, of course, finally, his failure to end his life. Like a true coward, he refused to appear in court, which even included refusing to attend his sentencing. It is for this and many other reasons that the jury would take only 45 minutes to unanimously find him guilty of sexual assault. With Kyle already pleading guilty to all other charges, it means that he will now face life in prison for the murder of Louise, life for the murder of Carol, and life for the murder of Hannah, while also receiving a whole life order, meaning there is no eligibility for parole. He also received 20 years for the SA of Louise, 8 years for the false imprisonment of Louise, 1 year for possession of a crossbow, and 1 year for possession of a knife, therefore extending his whole life order with an additional